Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a really special episode tonight. We have not one, but two researchers with us from Texas State University. We have Dr. Alyson Collins and Dr. Stephen Ciullo. Yay. And we are going to be talking about a subject that has been ignored for years, and it is writing. We started off our last episode with Leah Mermelstein, and we were talking about how it's important to combine reading and writing and how they really go together like peanut butter and jelly. And tonight we're actually going to get behind reading and writing and how it's taught and what the research is telling us. And we're going to get into teacher beliefs. So we have two articles, and one is special and general education teachers' beliefs about writing and writing instruction. And then the other article is writing expository essays from social studies texts, a self-regulated strategy development study, better known as SRSD to some of you. So we're actually going to start with the first article, the one on teachers' beliefs. And this has a strong impact on how they teach, how they feel about writing, how they feel about themselves as writing instructors. So I'd like to hear from Alyson and Steve about how they came up with this topic, because I find it fascinating, and what you found. I read the article, Judy read the article, but we want to hear from you. So who starts off, Alyson or Steve? Doesn't matter to us.
I think they're both muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Alyson.
Steve's
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad we're starting with this article. So just to give a little context, for this article, this was part of a 4-year study, and this study includes teacher surveys, as well as classroom observations of about 200 teachers over the scope of 4 years. So some exciting results we hope will be out on that in the spring. But what we did in this particular article is we zoomed in because we kind of assumed that we know what teachers need. A lot of people in higher ed kind of, make these suggestions, but we said, how do we really know what their needs are until we observe and we talk to them and start doing some surveys? So we really wanted to systematically survey teachers. And what we did is we looked at dyads. So we took a special ed teacher and a general education teacher, both assigned to teaching the same writing instruction to students in grade 4. And we really just wanted to learn about their needs and what their preparation was for teaching writing. Alyson and I like to both say how, like, coming through when we were in undergrad and even master's, I never had a formal class on how to become a good writing teacher. It was always kind of stuck in with the reading class. Like maybe there was a week or two of strategies that got thrown in there, but it was not solely dedicated towards writing. And we're both really committed to changing that. So so that's what we did. And we really just wanted to know about a few things. The first thing we were really interested with this survey study, and again, this is just one step, and hopefully we'll be back on here in the spring and we'll have a lot more to share. But we wanted to know about their preparation and how they felt about their preparation. We also really wanted to know about their self-efficacy and basically how do teachers perceive themselves as being able to provide quality writing instruction to students with IEPs. And again, some of that stems from our own experience, because I know that I received really quality trainings in reading instruction. Fortunately, I had classes in reading. But for writing, it's almost like we didn't have a curriculum. We didn't have a program or tools to grab. So we want to know about this, because eventually we want to create new interventions and we want to do good professional development, like Alyson's going to talk about later with the SRSD study. But in order to do that, we felt like we needed to get in there and watch teachers and talk to them. So yeah, two of the main things we found is that neither groups of teachers, the special ed teachers or the general education teachers, felt really prepared to teach writing instruction to students with IEPs. you know, you can look at that in different ways. In some ways, maybe it's not surprising because a lot of these teachers came through programs like us where they didn't have formal classes on how to do it. And maybe the professional development they've received in schools were on math or reading instead of writing. And it sounds like that's one of the reasons why you wanted to talk about this topic tonight. But the other thing we found out from both of them is that they both had this desire, both groups of teachers, special ed, gen ed, to learn more about how to teach writing. And they felt that writing is like malleable, that we can really, you know, through the power of good instruction, we can change students' writing outcomes. And we thought that was really encouraging because it's not like these teachers were, you know, upset or hardened and felt like these student difficulties that they faced in writing couldn't be altered. They really felt that they could. There's just really this expressed need for more professional development. And that kind of, you know, not to get too deep into the research, but there's been studies over the years, the last 10, 15 years, some really good survey studies by Steve Graham and his colleagues. And they've all really consistently shown that a lot of times teachers perceive themselves as less qualified to teach writing than all other subjects. So, and just given how important writing is for writing in school, but writing in life, you know, emailing friends, socialization, you know, we just feel like we really needed to learn more about this and try to get some information where we can try to move forward and bridge this gap.
So, Alyson, as I'm listening to Steve, I'm wondering why there's a difference between special ed teachers and gen ed teachers. What did you find, or what are your thoughts about that?
That's a good question. I think a lot about how we can help bridge these gaps, because so often these two groups of teachers are in silos. I think in our current, one of our more current projects, like that we just started last year, we're actually training these two groups together so that they are in the same room, they're receiving the same professional development, they're receiving the same training, the same message, the same instruction. And I think sometimes that's often what happens. Is, I always joke, but you know, right before we're headed back to school, you know, we have a week of training or however many days for teachers, and it's always special ed, you're going here, gen ed, we need you to go somewhere else. And they're not together, and they don't have a lot of planning time, and they don't have a lot of opportunities for that conversation. And then the year starts and it's busy. And so I think that that's part of it sometimes, is that we're not all trying to work together, to train together, to have the same kinds of instruction. We separate them into silos, and I think that sometimes that might be part of it.
So, Judy, you're in the schools. Do you have training gen ed and special ed together? Is that happening from what you see in your own school or in New York City? Generally, are special ed teachers brought together with gen ed teachers for professional development?
So I think that a lot of it depends on where you go and what school you're in, and I think it varies. You know, it's funny, I don't usually talk that much about my particular building where I am now, but I want to speak about it a little bit today because it's a very special place that I'm working in right now. And they have a very high special ed population in the school. They actually have a program that's called Horizon, and it's working with high functioning children on the spectrum. And I actually, ironically, visited them for writing instruction today because I wanted to see what was going on. The teacher reached out to me and she said, you know, Judy, I'm really struggling with getting these kids to write. And I think that sometimes special ed teachers, even though they're included in professional development together, some of their neurodivergent students do have needs that may look a little bit different, or actually, you know what, all kids have these needs. But I think that sometimes, you know, there are a lot of things going on in those classrooms. And I think my building is really trying to give attention to every learner so much and bringing us all together as learners. And I walk into those classrooms, whether it be general ed or special ed, with the highest of expectations for those kids, but also realizing that, kids are unique sometimes and they do have needs. But it was interesting to see in one classroom how many different needs there could be in one classroom. I mean, it was eye-opening. I mean, some kids couldn't hold a pencil and had a pencil grip, while another kid was writing a personal narrative and it was just going fine. I mean, it wasn't the fanciest personal narrative, but it was a starting point. And then another kid couldn't write, a letter or a formal letter. And it was like, I could see that the teacher was struggling. There's a para over here, another para over here. There's Coach Judy over here, another coach over there. And it's like, what if I wasn't there? The other coach wasn't there. It's very hard as a special ed teacher. I mean, it's hard for any teacher, but the one thing that I do want to say is that sometimes, I'm learning more about, kids with IEPs and kids in the special ed population. Ironically, sometimes they very often surpass
the gen ed
other classes. Yeah, my special ed classes right now, some of them on the foundations trackers in phonics scored 80 or above mastery in phonics, and there was no reteaching necessary. But now, how do we get that to transfer into the writing? Might be a little bit more complex.
So, you know what, Judy said, and she made an interesting comment about all the divergent needs in one room. And that is challenging. So from your study, you could see why, perhaps, at least I'm thinking, why a teacher in that population, in that type of room, would feel perhaps they were inadequately trained, prepared for, this environment, and then add in that they might have their own struggles in writing. And I'm not just saying special ed teachers, all teachers. That goes for all teachers. That across the board, you will see that sometimes teachers lack confidence in their own writing. And it was not really stressed at the university. And now they have to teach a subject that they don't feel confident about. Your thoughts, either one of you. I'd love to hear about that.
Me first? Okay. Well, a couple of things you said I could definitely relate to, especially as a former special education teacher. I started when you were talking about, both of you were talking about how you have needs that span from maybe essay organization all the way to letter formation and writing a complete sentence. I think about often how traditionally fourth grade has been the grade that's tested in writing. In Texas now, it starts in third, where they have integrated reading and writing. But those are the teachers that we've been looking at, that group, third, fourth, and fifth, for most of our studies. And when we talk to them, those are the needs that they're expressing, is that, how can you effectively differentiate in a classroom when you have some students that are just at the word level, or maybe struggling to put subject and predicate through a complete sentence, when you have other students, who are at a higher level. And then in the back of their minds, they know that there's that state test that's looming, and they have that writing assessment too. So yeah, I can relate to that completely. And I think that the confidence is one of the reasons that we like to use strategies like SRSD, because, I even think about me and the teachers that we work with, like, it's empowering to have a strategy to rely on. And I'm not sure how much you've gotten a chance to talk about self-regulated strategy development in the past on the show, but I know probably some listeners are familiar with it. But that's an example of something that is empowering, because students do, they become equipped with the tools to write about meaningful content, to writing about experiences really across genre areas. So I think that, that confidence piece that you talked about is something that I probably struggled with as a teacher when it came to teaching writing. I felt much more confident to teach reading and math because of my preparation. And I think, having quality interventions, quality strategies, and then really good professional development and coaching like we do, through our SRSD work is really, fundamental to helping these teachers feel more empowered.
So anyone listening, if you want to learn more about that, we had Leslie Lord on a while ago, and you know,
I have her book right near me.
yeah, and so she's wonderful, and we did talk about you know, the importance of self-regulation in writing, and we are going to have Karen Harris on soon. So we are really looking into some of the best writing research and strategies out there, or at least we're trying to, and to bring attention to something that we feel needs to be looked at. So, Alyson, as I was listening to Steve, I thought of just growth mindset. And so I don't know if you looked into this at all, but to me, it sounds as though that perhaps, you know, if the teachers feel insecure about teaching writing, are they maybe closed down? Maybe they have thoughts that these kids can't do it, so that they feel they can't do it. I almost feel it could be contagious, this feeling of that, you know what, they can't, I can't, and then they avoid a subject because they really are afraid of just putting themselves out there. And I keep thinking about the idea of growth mindset. Have you come across that in your studies, where maybe that teachers have a fixed mindset about their students or themselves, and perhaps that will impact what they do in the classroom?
So Steve, I'll let you chime in too. We do have another study that we have been looking at the beliefs around malleability, about how teachers believe they can change students' writing and how confident they feel around those beliefs. In the article we were talking about earlier, I do know that we looked at how teachers felt about how they can develop writers through maybe effort versus just knowledge, and who provides that knowledge to them. And a lot of the gen ed teachers tend to lean towards, they feel like they can change those efforts, or they can change students' progress through their effort, the effort they put forth. And special education teachers, for whatever reason, felt less confident in being able to do that. I do think some of this sometimes still goes back to, and thinking about malleability, because we're also looking at it in the new study that I mentioned that we're just in progress in. We are measuring malleability before and after professional development to see if even can we change that mindset through our professional development. And sometimes I do wonder, I don't know yet, this is more speculation, but I do wonder, is it sometimes also having access to tools? And I was thinking about, as y'all were talking earlier, so much of, I feel like, what we've learned over the last few years with training teachers and leading professional development is sometimes I feel like the same way our students need explicit instruction and strategies and tools, our teachers need the same thing. So when y'all were talking about the wide range of students in a classroom and the need to differentiate and meet all those needs, I feel like so often the teachers, what's overwhelming is they don't know how to do that sometimes. What does that look like? And I think one of the things we've been trying to do in one of our new studies is really give them the tools of, how would you explicitly differentiate and what does this look like? Rather just assuming that we're going to give them a lesson plan and they're just going to know what to do with it. We're trying to give them some more toolboxes that say, okay, you know, here's some reflection questions and here's some ways that you can, you know, self-assess how it's going, formatively assess your students and think strategically about where to go next. And so I hope that in that same realm, we can support also that mindset, that growth mindset too, that we do have the power as educators to make a difference in students, and boosting that confidence there.
So as I'm listening to both Steve and Alyson, Judy, I keep thinking about how we take kids out of gen ed sometimes,
Mhm.
and these are the kids who struggle the most. And then we're putting them into special ed classes with teachers who actually lack confidence in writing, where they might not even get the same type of instruction that they would have received in the gen ed classroom. And so, you know, the special ed teacher is supposed to be the specialist in dealing with kids with learning issues. And here I'm hearing that, you know what, we could be pulling kids out and we don't even know if they're getting what they need in a self-contained room or, you know, an ICT class. So I'm wondering, Judy, just in terms from your own experience, how have you felt maybe about writing, just, you know, your own type of writing instruction and your confidence level, and, you know, just maybe you could talk about that just as somebody who's in a building. How do you feel about that?
So I think it's hard to like just in general box people into a certain category. I think that, you know, the special ed teachers that I've come across with lately, some of them have just had such enthusiasm and such an open mind and so much confidence in their kids and their kids' abilities that they just surprised me. I think sometimes, you know, for newer teachers it's hard, but that's for special education teachers or just a new teacher in general. But I'm definitely seeing that it just kind of depends on the building culture. Like if the building culture is a learning environment where, you know, you have people coming into your room all the time, but it's just a safe space to grow and learn, that's going to make a tremendous difference. And I think that, you know, if I have to be honest, writing instruction in general, or not writing instruction, also the samples that I'm seeing lately citywide, they've been pretty weak for a while. And I'm like trying to analyze, why is it that writing samples looked way better when I was teaching back in, you know, the classroom about 10 years ago or whatever? They looked way better. And I'm like, did something change? What's going on? And I think that, you know, there's so many things that it could be. Like, for instance, now schools are shifting into research-based or evidence-based curriculums. And I think, you know, New York City schools adopted HMH into reading. And, you know, the reading instruction, nothing's perfect, right? Nothing's perfect. We've talked about that on previous episodes, that it's just a tool. But, you know, the reading instruction seems to have gotten a lot of attention. And I see that the writing piece may have not, you know, been fully fleshed out yet. And I think in the articles that both of you wrote, there was a lot of discussion about how it's easier to connect the reading and writing, and also if you could incorporate like social studies content in there. And sometimes it just feels like in these buildings, it just doesn't feel as connected. And it's very hard sometimes when reading and writing is not connected. So that's something that I know if I was still in the classroom, I would definitely struggle with. But the other thing that's really hard is like, so I took a training, The Writing Revolution. Now I'm reading about Leslie Ward's program, and I'm slowly pushing through, you know, she said she was nice enough to send me, you know, an online learning course. And those things are all great. And I know that these are like different methods, but how do you incorporate all these great methods and best practices into a program that your principal or your district or school may have chosen? It's not as easy as it sounds. It takes so much thinking. And there's just, I feel like there's just too much thinking that's required of special ed teachers and general ed teachers at the moment, that even I struggle.
So I love what you just said, Judy. I just absolutely love it. I really, honey, I really do. So,
you know, I was nervous about this episode because let me tell you, there's a lot of research and numbers, and that's not really my thing. But when it comes to like talking about what's going on in the classroom, it's natural for Faith and I, you know, that's what makes our podcast unique. We're working with kids all the time. We're sitting there, we're working with teachers. That's our life. So that comes natural. The research part scared me a little bit, but I do have to say though, I'm really, you know, happy to sit with researchers, but how do we get these researchers and all the good things that they're saying to come into the buildings? You know, like, I don't want it just to sit in an article that somebody read, or somebody tweeted this article, we're all saying it's great, and then it doesn't transfer into, you know, my life or
Right.
Faith's life.
So that is a great segue into article number 2, okay?
Yeah.
Because we have teacher beliefs, and now your second article actually gives a framework for writing. That's what you know, the whole idea of you know, self-regulation is, that there is a model, there's a framework, and that's the acronym TIDE, that we go with the topic, and then we put down the important ideas, and then the details, and then there's an ending, TIDE, right? And so there's this framework for teachers and for students to learn, and this gives them the confidence to be able to put together, you know, essays and paragraphs, and be able to then improve their reading as well by understanding and finding the topic and the big ideas and the details, that they work together simultaneously. I hope I'm saying that right. Yes? Yes, okay. Nobody
You're
here
doing a great job. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yes.
I just want to be clear that I'm saying it the right way. So now Judy brought up something very important. A lot of schools have the writing revolution, and then you have research on this. And schools are going to try to figure this out, or be left to figure this out, along with core programs or schools that don't have core programs. So I guess in practical terms, how do you do all this? How do all the pieces fit? Is there research about one and not research about another? Are we confusing what the science really is, the science of reading? Because it sounds like there's a lot out there, and we're just regular people here,
Yeah.
you know, working with kids. So, you know, Steve, why don't you kick that one off? So let's start talking about article number 2. And that is writing expository essays from social studies texts, a self-regulated strategy development study. Do you want to just kick that off, and then Alyson will jump in with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that too. I mean, one of the unique features about that article, which linked to the current project we have now, which is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. It's a pandemic relief project aimed at closing learning gaps, but a lot of teachers seem to be apprehensive about how to purposefully integrate reading and writing, because I think sometimes these things were thought of as separate. You know, we do our practice, you know, writing time here, and then we have reading. And you're right, they do go hand in hand, and there's such great opportunities to, you know, to extend one's knowledge and to write about meaningful content. So that's part of why we did it. The article that you're referring to with the TIDE strategy, we did that in 3rd grade. So it was 3rd grade inclusive classrooms, and we had really good outcomes. The teachers that we worked with in that study really, you know, expressed us that they didn't have prior experience doing this. So, and when I say doing this, I mean, you know, kind of integrating reading and writing together. So we liked the results that we saw from that, and it gave them the opportunity to write about, you know, meaningful social studies text and use strategies to do so. But moving to this current project that we have, Turning the Tide, which is the bigger practice-based professional development one, you know, you kind of asked about how do you know what to pick? Well, one of the reasons we picked SRSD is because it does have such a, you know, a deep evidence base. And, you know, it's, you know, Alyson and I didn't invent SRSD. We're fortunate enough to be, you know, working involved in the project, but, you know, a lot of, and I know you both feel this way too, it's really just important for, especially as schools start to adopt these programs, just like we're seeing with reading, that they are just being critical consumers, and that they are adopting things that do have a strong evidence base. And, the nice thing about SRSD is it has shown effectiveness across different writing genres, narrative, persuasive, opinion writing, expository, which is important too. I think sometimes it's easy to think that, good writing is good writing, but a lot of the research does show that good writing in one genre doesn't necessarily translate to good writing in another genre. We have to write scientific articles, but I would not be the best person for you to come to and ask you, to write a poem or a story. So the nice thing about SRSD is it really allows the teachers to roll up their sleeves and provide the knowledge to really become an expert in that genre. And also, in addition to the strategies that you mentioned, like the TIDE acronym, one of I think the powerful pieces that schools who start adopting programs like SRSD get is that self-regulation piece, because writing is hard for us. And, when I'm writing a book chapter or doing something, I have strategies and self-regulation techniques that I'm doing for myself. Like I'm talking myself through it. I'm encouraging myself. I'm telling myself that, I can have a cup of coffee in a little while if I keep working. We all do these things. And what we do in SRSD is we make these strategies and techniques, and even the way we think about it, we make them visible for students, so that students who struggle with writing know, hey, it's challenging for my teacher too, but she has acquired these tools that she can work her way through this. We have a planner that we can use. So that's one of the things I like about it the most, because I think a lot of people use graphic organizers, and graphic organizers in itself are an evidence-based intervention for literacy. But, comprehensive writing programs, such as SRSD, I think some of the added emphasis that they get, and I think some of the extra things that might help with motivation and self-efficacy are that piece where we're just really teaching students to be intentional, monitor their learning. So I really like that. And, that was kind of a long way of answering your questions of, it's important to use evidence-based strategies. And really SRSD, we're happy to be working on that program for this project, because in response to the pandemic and school-related closures and gaps in learning, one of the key focuses of this competition through IES, where we have funding for this one project, was really that you had to come prepared with something that schools could have confidence in. And that's kind of why we took this coaching and professional development approach to SRSD.
So, Alyson, I could tell you that schools right now are jumping on this content area, knowledge-based curriculum. And so, there's a lot out there, a lot of different names. I'm not going to name them, but you know what I'm talking about. And, I'd like to know how those compare to adopting this framework with social studies texts, as opposed to buying a canned curriculum that is knowledge-based. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but from what I read in the article, it doesn't sound like it's a curriculum. It sounds like it's a structure that could be applied to anything across any type of content area, as opposed to getting a reading curriculum that's knowledge-based.
So comparing the two, or I don't know, I guess it's kind of hard to exactly say, okay, this one, you have to work within, and schools have lots of options. I think the one that we work from, I've done some work in reading research too, and reading comprehension and the things that predict how students perform. And we do know that knowledge is a very large piece of that. When you look at fancy statistical models and things, we know that knowledge is really important. And I think that we don't, in our program or SRSD lessons and framework, we don't necessarily, and I wouldn't even say to frame a program, because you're right, it's more of a series of lessons and strategies that you can use with students that incorporate these multi-component pieces of SRSD. And I say it's beyond strategies because I would say it's beyond strategies because we have goal setting, self-regulation. There's a lot of pieces to it. With that said, I think for us, we don't come at it by ignoring that knowledge isn't a factor. We know that's very much a piece of the puzzle or the onion. You know, I always like to say when I'm working with my undergraduate or graduate students, I teach the assessment class, and we always talk about there's many different layers to a student, right? And so we can't always focus on one piece because there's other pieces that also are playing a role in that student's development. So I think for us in that we acknowledge that the knowledge piece is there, but we are using basically science, social studies, content area, text as kind of a mechanism for pulling out the information that we can write from. So teaching students, you know, if I were to read something, how do I get that information out from my passage to make it into something coherent and organized in my writing. So I think with that said, we, you know, build vocabulary knowledge as we're doing that. As we read the text, we talk about the text, we discuss what are those pieces that we need, how do we find those important ideas in the TIDE strategy. So with that said, I think what you did touch on though that is a challenge is there are a lot of things available. And for schools, it's always hard because there are competing, you know, I don't want to say competing programs, but there's a lot of choices out there. And at the end of the day, we do have limited time, right? So we have to pick something. We can't pick everything always. So I think what Steve said is really what I think we are really hoping to do is to make these resources more available because we know there is an evidence base. We know that we've got some strong evidence that SRSD works for a number of years. I think with that, so often though, the schools don't even know about it. I mean, that's how I came about to where I am today is somebody said, you might want to look at Steve Graham's work and I found SRSD. When I was searching as a reading intervention specialist, I was searching for, I need some writing tools. I have all these reading tools. Where are the writing ones for my students? I think with that too, though, and now I'll probably thinking that too, is getting it out to the schools. But also what I think I've seen is once a teacher, sometimes we just say, you know, give it a few weeks, just try it, right? Even sometimes for the schools, let's just see how this goes. So often what we see, at least in our professional development training, is once the teachers get into it, and the students start making progress and they start to see that progress, then the enthusiasm's there, right? Then this, I guess, conflict of which one do I pick kind of bypasses because they see the progress. So then they've kind of bought into the lessons. And so I think to me, some of it, we just try to work with the schools of looking at schedules and teachers and saying, okay, let's look at your day. You've got 30 minutes. Let's figure out what we can do with that 30 minutes, you know? And then some other teachers, after they start teaching, then they give us 45 minutes or an hour, you know, and they figure out how to work that time in. But I think for us too, some of it is just coming at it too and knowing that there are these complicated pieces, that time is precious in schools. And so just trying to work with the schools on where they're at, and also trying not to say, okay, you can't do that other program too. Let's figure out how we can fit this one in with what you're already doing and where that time comes from.
So, you know, as I'm listening to this, I'm going back to Judy's question about having, you know, a program picked for the school. The teachers aren't picking it, you know, they're given a program. And in New York City, the principals and, you know, made choices and not
Three options.
three options. And the programs obviously have all these components. It's a core program. So, you know, I guess I'm trying to think, how would you sell this to schools? And when I say sell, I mean the idea, selling the idea that this is really important and can boost the writing across different content areas when the day is limited in time and funds are limited and the teachers are just, they are trying to figure this all out. I mean, you know, I guess I'm left wondering how this would all go. And is there research or research that says that some of these other things aren't effective? You know, because obviously you're saying you have a lot of research here for SRSD, but if they're using some other things that they're saying are SOR, science of reading, is that proven, or is it just rhetoric? Is it just like people are saying it is, but there really doesn't, you know, there's not enough science behind it? That's what I'm wondering. Like, for instance, Judy, like what, if your principal now is trying to make sure that this core program gets rolled out, right?
Well, he was right, but that's what the superintendent sets out district, right? Of course.
I mean, does it have a writing component in it? Does it have a framework for writing already built in?
Yes.
So why would they want to add in something else? I guess, and again, I'm trying to just question this. If I'm a school.
Well, I don't think most principals would probably want to do that right away, right? Now that they're rolling, it's year one for a lot of schools. My school's a phase 2 school, but many schools are in phase 1 of rolling out evidence-based curriculum. I think they're going to want to see what kind of results and what happens with the curriculum that's followed with quote unquote fidelity, the famous F word in education. It can mean a lot of things, that F word. I think that's an important piece. And I think what's really going to happen though is maybe principals won't see the exact results that they want. And that's when the questioning starts. Is it teacher practice? Is it the program? Do we need some
science of reading?
But then, you know, like for instance, yes, I love the writing revolution. I was trained in it. I don't know if there's evidence, not evidence. Faith and I go back and forth, whatever. But okay, so I know a method. So I try to sprinkle it here and sprinkle it there. It's not very easy to take. Like, what happens with SSRD? Do you say, okay, I'm an HMH school with SSRD, or I'm a Wit and Wisdom school and we do SSRD? How does that like work? And then I have like 30 other questions. So Faith, at the end of the show, please, I have a couple of really important questions.
Okay, so I guess we just threw out a whole lot to you. So
right, so is there research, like, are you guys working specifically with schools that have certain curriculums, and are you seeing different results if it's an HMH school versus a teacher's college school? Oh yes, I said it, a Lucy school versus a Wit and Wisdom school, or an expeditionary learning school, or a core knowledge school, or a no curriculum school.
Right. I mean, there's so much out there. So
yeah,
we'd love to hear that.
I see what you're asking. And it sounds like the context you're coming from in New York, there are things that, you know, are sort of, I'm guessing that are mandated that schools are picking
from. A lot of states are moving in that direction. And I live in Connecticut. It's going in that direction now too.
In the schools we work with, part of the reason that we're doing SRSD and Tide is through the teachers we observed and the teachers we interviewed, a lot of them actually didn't really have a program like that. You know, they had their science curriculum, their social studies curriculum, and something, you know, typically adopted for reading. You know, schools have really gotten better about, you know, fortunately, science of reading initiatives. But yeah, that we can't really make those comparisons for what we're doing to some of these other writing programs maybe you're mentioning, because you know, we'll find out more as we observe the typical practice conditions. But during our typical practice observations on our other studies, and some of these are going to be published very soon, the teachers were, you know, not necessarily following any type of adopted writing intervention program. or adopted writing curriculum. And it was kind of cool. Like a couple of weeks ago, the teachers we were talking to were just thrilled that we were there providing this professional development in something like SRSD. And it's not like SRSD is the only answer, but they were fortunate because they were expressing to us that they just really didn't have an intervention or a writing framework before. So I do think it would be really confusing as a teacher if there was already a few in place and then, you know, I showed up and I was trying to get you to do something different. That might be really confusing for teachers. I when I meet with districts, I encourage them to look at programs that do have evidence behind them. We've been really heavily involved in this, so I can't speak for all the other programs. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be honest if I said I knew what the evidence behind all of them, but I'm really comfortable with the evidence behind SRSD. And I do know that a lot of the schools we're working with, they're not having that problem in our experience of having to juggle all these different things because they really just didn't have a core set of intervention frameworks to go on. So, you know, I think in our experience, and Alyson, I don't know, you know, to have anything to add to that, but we're fortunate that one of the, you know, we can't say their names, but one of the large districts we're working with now that does have a lot of high needs is just really fortunate to have this partnership where we're providing PD and we're providing ongoing coaching, because a lot of the teachers, just to kind of go back to our conversation earlier, a lot of the teachers were just expressing, you know, their frustrations with maybe not having a lot of college courses or PD previously on how to teach writing. So for some of the teachers we're working with, you know, this, in some ways, this might be their, you know, their most formal training to date.
Alyson? Yeah, so if you could add to what Steve just said, yeah.
So there's a couple things I'll extend on what Steve said. I think there are a few schools in the current project that are using bigger curriculums. We've got a number of different districts we work with, so we kind of got a range. And we will have in the new project some comparison conditions where we can compare what typical practice looks like and how they are doing, how they perform on the state test, how they perform on our assessments, how they norm referenced assessments, how different those classes do and those students do depending on which group, in which classroom they're in. So I do think there will be some possibilities to explore how some of those compare, but maybe on a smaller scale though, because it's a handful of classrooms and a handful of in each group. But what I would add, thinking along those lines, is I think sometimes the question too is not always is something effective or not effective. To me, sometimes I ask myself, what's the magnitude of something being effective? So rather than, we might have two interventions that both work, but one may give you more bang for your buck, right? You may see larger gains in students faster. And so I think there's that element too sometimes, is I think sometimes we forget that maybe sometimes there's a lot of things that work. It just depends on to what extent, you know, how large those gains might be in students, and also for who they work for, right? Certain students and different characteristics, certain programs may be more well suited for them, right? But I think the other element too that we forget about is there's so much of the implementer, the teacher, that makes something work. And so some of the things I think oftentimes that we're interested in too, in some of our more recent work, is to think about what are the factors, what's happening in a classroom or with students and teachers that make something more or less effective. So again, we see results in this classroom and across, you know, at a different school, you know, a few blocks over, we're not seeing the same results. Why is that? And I think there's a lot of, you know, as we all know, education is complicated. And so sometimes I think that's something we forget. We just want to say, yes, this worked, no, this doesn't. But I don't think it's that simple, I guess.
No, it's not simple. That's why we have you on. Because it's not simple at all. And, you know, there's a lot out there. And we really want to know, as you said, which provides the biggest gains. Like, looking at this, we want to know what exactly provides the most gains and helps the most children. And in reading your studies, the one thing that stood out to me was this idea of the PBPD, the practice-based professional development, along with biweekly coaching. And that, to me, I mean, Judy and I are both coaches. I'm a consultant and have done a lot of coaching. I was part of Reading First. And so I've been coaching in lots of different types of schools with, a diverse group of kids. And I know that coaching makes the difference, and the embedded coaching and the opportunity to practice whatever is taught in professional development, not just doing it and leaving teachers on their own to figure it out. So I'm looking at that piece as, to me, a tipping point, but that could really be important with any writing framework that you bring in. To me, that's the key to just about anything that you do, So Judy, any thoughts that I didn't cover? You said you wanted to ask some questions. So
All right, can I just read off my little notes quickly? Okay. How is SSRD going for not like kids that are really just non-readers yet? Are you seeing good results for the kids that can't read in the classes? Because there's a lot of kids right now that we're seeing, nationwide, that are struggling with reading and decoding. So I would bet that, writing is really, really hard for those kids. What kind of results are you seeing for your non-readers? And what does it look like? Does it go beyond just seeing like kids drawing pictures? And how does SSRD look upon pictures? Is there labeling? Do you start with just pictures and so forth? That's the first one.
Is it my turn?
Well,
Sure.
Okay. Alyson, whoever wants to jump in.
Well, in the grade levels we're working with now, there probably are some students. We don't have results yet to know. I think at the end of this year, we'll probably know better of how some of those students who are at a very foundational level of reading are doing. I will say one of the things that you see through SRSD, and we were able to see this last year and on some of the previous studies that you were talking about, is because students are learning how to think about writing, there is a place for pictures. Like, if they're having a graphic organizer or a planning device, if a picture would help a student to think about keywords and what they might want to write a sentence about, even if it's at a basic level, we encourage that. So yeah, I think that, SRSD was kind of, my understanding of the history of is it was more for written responses. I will say now, Alyson and I are not doing this in our study. There's some research going on. I think Karen Harris is doing it, so she may want to talk to you about it, but it's called SRSD Plus, where they're lowering it. So they're still SRSD, but they're, when I say lowering it, they're reducing it to lower grade levels, and they're working on more sentence construction, sentence level skills, and I believe grammar too. So we're not doing SRSD Plus in our study, because what we're doing is really just focusing on equipping them with the strategies they need to integrate these things. So we're not really, I'm not to say we're not working with non-readers, but our focus, a lot of the students that we have in our study are kind of writing at a sentence level or two. And what we're trying to do is get those students to write more, but not just write more, but write with better quality, write with better ideas. And if they're writing about information that they've learned about, carefully designed information through their science or social studies curriculum, just writing about something that they know about and that's meaningful to them. So these strategies can help, whether it's, a student who's just writing a sentence or two, or someone who's writing, a lot, but maybe just needs help with organization.
All right, that's a good one. Next one,
Well,
personal
wait,
narrative.
before, I think Allison wanted to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I have a very quick add to what Steve was saying. I will say that some of our preliminary results from last year on this new project that's similar to the article that we were talking about with the practice-based professional development, but this one's the one with general and special education teachers working together. We did see that in our classrooms where they were implementing SRSD, as Steve mentioned, Texas just shifted last year to this integrated reading writing starting in third grade. So their state assessment was a drastic change for teachers last year, where traditionally fourth grade had been kind of the writing grade where we assessed it. Now it's integrated reading writing where students have to construct a written response to a passage or two passages even. And I will say what I was going to add is what we have seen is that even some of our students that had more difficulty with writing, we had fewer students scoring a 0 in those classrooms. So even if they weren't scoring, an 8, a 10 on the scale, we had fewer students on that floor, right? And I think that was really exciting so far to see that we can bump them up, that we're making progress beyond.
Judy, you had another question?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm going to go fast. Personal narratives. I see them all over the place for years and years and years. And now I'm seeing them again. Do you guys do a lot? Is there a lot of research to support that that's a very important piece of writing for young kids? And why do I see it all the time everywhere?
Judy, when you see it, is it across different grade levels? The
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in our experience, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, because there's been really an emphasis in the state of Texas on writing to inform and using source-based texts to write. I don't want to say that narrative doesn't exist, but a lot of the work that we've done in our observations and in the observation study that we mentioned earlier, I think, I don't know, we'd have to parse out the data, but I think a lot of it has been expository.
That's what I would think. That's why I was like thinking I'm going to see that right away, and nope, back to that.
Yeah.
Is there research behind into
narrative writing? I think there are strategies and interventions that can boost narrative writing. I'm not quite sure about, if there's research to say at what age or what grade level quality narrative writing should be emphasized, though. Are you aware of that, Alyson?
I was thinking about that, not off the top of my head. I mean, I think there's an element, it's a balance, right? I think there's a piece that the more we teach students to write, regardless of the genre, and the more explicit we are in that teaching, and the more we support them and provide that space to be successful in writing, I think it's all beneficial, right? Because thinking, when you practice something more frequently, you're likely with good practice, you're likely to get better at it, right? Because you have more opportunities and all of those pieces. So I think that's important. I think the nice thing about SRSD is that there are different, like we talk about the TIDE strategy, but there's within the SRSD framework and the multi-component intervention, you can teach narrative writing, you can teach persuasive writing, you can teach all these other pieces. There's a revising strategy. So you don't have to necessarily, you can repeat the framework with different strategies.
I have a major question, Alyson. Can I jump in? And it just came now, it's not on my notes. What about the whole writing process, like the general old-fashioned way, or the way that I still see it very often, today you're drafting day, today you're revising day, now you're editing, and now you're publishing. And I know a lot of kids hate publishing. Some kids love it. The ones that can write well love it. And the ones that don't like to write, and now they're having to look at their draft and take it and transfer it on a nice piece of paper. So does SSRD have the whole writing process looking that way? And is there research to support the way it's being done in a lot of these other programs?
Steve, do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to talk about writing process approach?
You can start.
I'll think about a couple different elements. So some of our teachers actually do that. I think some of them, I'll have to think about publishing. You know, I think displaying work outside the hallway and things like that, we see them do. I think we have been working with schools that have done it in somewhat this writing process where they plan one day, they write the next, they revisit it. I do think I think that revising, editing process is really important. That's how we grow as writers. That's how we learn to think critically about how we write and how we can be, grow as writers. I think we were talking about something the other day that we were writing, thinking about peer conversation, so engaging in that writing process, and that we're all at different stages, but let's give each other feedback, and I think all of that is very important and can be embedded in SRSD. I think, again, sometimes it's how it's presented and how it's implemented. I think one thing too is understanding that sometimes the writing process, it doesn't have to be so rigid either, right? Because I don't always write or plan, draft, revise, publish. I plan, I draft, I plan some more, I draft a little bit, or I revise a little bit. So I think there's that. Sometimes I think we think of it as a linear piece, and when really it's not. And so sometimes I think that's maybe just the biggest thing to keep in mind, is that process is important, but sometimes it's how we frame it and how we approach it and how we teach kids that's also just as important.
So I want to jump in. One thing that I noticed in the article was that there were 6 stages that were mentioned here. The first 2 being developing background knowledge and discussing it. And to me, that's so important, because you can't write unless everybody kind of has a starting place with some common knowledge, right? Some background knowledge. You can get that from your social studies curriculum and your social studies text, or you can have a reading program that builds in the knowledge component to start. And does it matter, as long as we are making sure we're developing background knowledge? Your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I should clarify for SRSD, because these are genre-based approaches, when you look at those, of course, that the background knowledge about what they're going to write is critical. That piece is critical. When SRSD refers to developing, background knowledge, a lot of what they're talking about in this particular program is developing knowledge about the genre. So if you're going to write about, argumentative writing or persuasive writing, if that's the focus of your next few months, a lot of it is building students' understanding of why you would want to use that type of writing. So what are times in school and in life where you may want to, craft a very well thought out argumentative piece, pulling from sources, writing claims and counterclaims. So, not to, get too deep into it, but a lot of what SRSD does, and what you're probably referring to in that article, is when it's building prior knowledge and background knowledge, it's really, a lot of it is genre knowledge, because each of these genres has its own place, and we really want students not just to understand what to do, but why they're doing it. So what are some circumstances in school or in life where they would want to engage in these different types of writing? And we've seen some teachers make really good connections to it too. I mean, persuasion is always very interesting for kids to talk about. It could be trying to convince a peer or a parent to do something, or we've had kids I was observing a middle school class a couple years ago, and they were saying, well, when I'm older, I'm going to be like my brother, and I'm going to start, debating politics online, and I want to know how to craft a good argument. So I think there's a lot of it is, building that deep understanding and appreciation for why these different types of writing each have a very important role.
Judy, you have any other questions?
No, I'm going to behave. The only, I do want to say though, we had the word strategy, Faith. Remember, there was a whole thing between strategy and knowledge building. So I'm happy to hear affirmation that strategy work is very important, and that makes total sense. Of course, the knowledge is important, but I like that the research is supporting that strategy component, and I can't wait to learn more about these strategies. And I'm hoping that these kind of great things can come more into the classroom. My gut feeling is I don't think that a lot of these programs that have been adopted are going away, but I hope that with time folks like you guys can help bring this into schools so that we can have better writing instruction, because right now I think schools do need support with writing, and I think kids need support with writing. And I still haven't figured out why writing used to look better before than it does now, but I'm gonna think about that another day.
Well, one thing just to, as we close down too, that Faith mentioned earlier that I think is so important, of regardless of what program it is, you said it, you can't have one professional development session and expect people to adopt. So practice-based approaches where, we get to model for teachers, regardless of what strategy it is or what curriculum it is. And then the teachers get to practice it for us. And then with that ongoing coaching, that's really important. A lot of us, you could both relate to this. We've all attended professional developments where maybe we went for a day or two and the ideas were very motivating.
Yeah.
And the techniques that they taught us were probably things that we would really like to adopt, but without that follow through. So whatever programs people are using, even some of these other programs that you're alluding to that we might not even be familiar with, we would just hope that there is a lot of wraparound professional development, a lot of coaching to go along with that, just so that teachers feel confident and their capacity continues to be built. Stephen,
how come we don't see more people like you in the buildings? How do we get people like the researchers really to bridge that gap?
I think Judy read my mind, because as I'm listening to both of you, clearly you are both roll up your sleeves, hands-on. You don't really see that in the research world, and that's part of why there is this void, I think. And it's not translating research to practice because you don't see enough people in your roles actually in the schools. And my last thought that I just want to get across is, it's actually a question. Have you put SRSD in a school without that support, without the professional, how is it said here? Practice-based. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. Practice-based professional development and bi-weekly coaching. Like, have you looked at it where you just put this in without the coaching and without the practice-based piece? And did you compare that? Just curious. And that's my last question.
I have not, but Alyson, I'm curious what you're going to say, because maybe you've done studies before you came to Texas State that I wasn't aware of.
Well, I think what I was going to say is stay tuned. This new project we keep talking about, we're layering. So we're doing practice-based professional development with general and special education teachers. And then we are also, this year, we're adding a new group. And that group is working through a program called SRSD Online. It's similar to the Think SRSD that Leslie Lau does. And that group of teachers is actually working through modules online. So different than a professional development program where they come and kind of a traditional, I'm going to sit and I'm going to practice the lessons for a day and then I'll go back and teach it. That group is actually working through more of a self-paced learning. And so with that said, both groups are still getting coaching. I think that support is really important, as we all said. But I think there's opportunities in the future too to explore, like, when we pull back on things, I always think about, like, what is the magic ingredient that makes something work, right? And so we're not far enough along to say it works with or without coaching, at least in our work. But with that said, I think there's going to be opportunities that we are exploring. How can we make this? To me, I'm always like, how can we make this reach wider and still get this to the teachers, and still be that support system for them? So I think it's more of a stay tuned over the next few years. We are looking at some different questions around that.
All exciting. So any last thoughts that Judy and I did not cover? This is just, last thoughts, either one of you, we would love to hear. Anything we didn't cover or you want to just get across that maybe we didn't yet?
One thing I'll add that could be a sneak preview of a conversation all of us could have in 6 to 9 months is, I know on your show, you've had several really good guests on talking about meta-analysis in the past, and we don't want to get, too much into the statistical side of it. But one of the things that we're hoping we can sit down and talk with a lot of people about, maybe at this time next year, is we're doing a very comprehensive meta-analysis of kindergarten through 5th grade writing, where we are looking at, what interventions work, for whom do they work, and on what outcomes. And that is going to maybe hopefully answer some of the questions that you had earlier about, what types of programs work, which ones don't, because through that meta-analysis, we'll be able to look at a lot of different levels. We'll be able to break down subcomponents. We can look at which programs or which type of interventions might be best for spelling, what types might be best for handwriting, for planning, you name it. So,
that's so cool.
Yeah,
we have to have them on with Nate. We can have a party with Nate Joseph.
Yeah, so I mean,
no, Faith, you gotta keep it quiet. Faith, the copycats are gonna try to steal our ideas. Shh.
You're with us.
Well, one of the things that we want to talk to you both about too, and even some of the people that you work with and that listen, is, eventually when we get to that point where we're disseminating, meta-analyses, like, we both think that researchers need to do a better job of translating these findings to practice. And we think we have some good ideas about how to do it, but they're probably not the best. So it would be great to crowdsource some of these ideas with you, talk to teachers, and just find out, like, we're not expecting teachers to sit down and read meta-analyses. And even if they did, it might not be that meaningful to them. So what can we all do as researchers or people in higher education to really translate these findings in a way that policymakers, school districts, teachers, and parents can really digest them and think, okay, like, this is what we know, this is what the research tells us, this is what it doesn't tell us, here's a path forward. So I think I'll be reaching out to both of you over the next year as this gets closer to talk about this too. And if you want some other guests that can talk about research to practice
Don't say it
in special ed,
talk privately.
Yeah, we can message them to you. But thank you for letting us say that.
Even gonna get a DM, and Allison's they're gonna get other DMs.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to we're just thrilled that you gave us the opportunity to talk about writing, because, awesome. As we started out this segment with, it's just something that, we both feel very passionate about. And I'm confident that if we give teachers the tools and the strategies and the resources, we can definitely move the needle.
I know that's true. And we're so excited and so happy that you came on the show. Alyson, any last thoughts?
No, I don't know, but I feel like we've covered just about everything, but I do appreciate y'all acknowledging our enthusiasm around supporting teachers in schools, because I think that is really our passion, and the research is interesting, but we really want to be supporting teachers and students. So thanks for acknowledging that.
And it comes through. It really comes through. You are both fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to having you on in the spring or whenever. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks
so much.
Our audience for listening. we are going to have Karen Harris on, and she is a key researcher. And she is, I think, the person, along with Steve Graham, who they're responsible for SRSD. So we're going to get it right from the horse's mouth, right? And so we're really excited to have Karen Harris on. So I hope people will follow us with this writing series, because we know that that's what you want. Judy and I did a survey, and that's what you told us, and that's what we're doing. So thank you so much for joining us. Judy, you want to tell people how they can get in touch with us?
Yes, so follow us on the newly designed Instagram Literacy View. You could also follow Faith on Instagram if you want to follow her personal Instagram and her business Instagram. Her business one is High Five Literacy. Mine is Boxner Damsky. Follow us on Twitter at Boxner Judy. Follow Faith on Twitter at Faith Burkowski. Follow both of us and join our group, the Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Also, we have a YouTube channel that you could subscribe to, and you could find us all over Apple, Spotify. You know where to find us.
Great. All
Thank
right.
you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.